Good morning. Welcome to those in person and those joining us virtually to Ball State University's Constitution Day celebration. I am Paige Turner, and it is my honor to serve as the Dean of the College of Communication, Information, and Media at Ball State University. It is a particular honor, given that Ball State University is an institution that embraces the responsibilities and opportunities provided by the U.S. Constitution. We see that in our students, staff, faculty, and our president, who, although he could not be here today, would like to extend his welcome. I present President Mearns.
Hello, I'm Jeff Mearns. I have the good fortune to serve as the president here at Ball State University, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you in Sursa Hall and to all of you watching the live stream to welcome you to our university's Constitution Day celebration. Now, as many of you may know, Constitution Day commemorates the day in 1787 when our forebears stood in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the same place where the Declaration of Independence was signed 11 years earlier, and they signed the world's longest surviving written charter of government. The first three words of the Constitution, "We the people," these words affirm that our government was designed to serve us, our citizens. Today, our university community gathers to celebrate the protections provided in the Constitution, specifically the rights and responsibilities outlined in the First Amendment. The First Amendment endows upon every person the right to express a wide range of opinions and views, to ensure a free exchange of ideas, even if those ideas are unpopular. And the First Amendment imposes upon each one of us a reciprocal obligation to respect the rights of others to express those ideas and those opinions. The First Amendment also holds space for a free and independent press to help hold our elected officials accountable in our country's representative democracy. Now, our university has long recognized that the cornerstone of a vibrant community is the full and free expression of ideas that are protected under the First Amendment, as well as a responsible student and public media. Our commitment to these rights is codified in our university's Bill of Rights and Responsibilities and in our commitment to inclusive excellence. Our commitment is also displayed daily through the work of our student journalists. Thank you to everyone, all of our faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends whose work supports our freedom of the press and our freedom of expression. And I'm grateful to all of you who have gathered today to remember and to recognize that the freedoms protected in our Constitution are freedoms of speech, religion, press, assembly, and the right to petition the government. These rights make us, as citizens of the United States, among the freest people in the world. I appreciate the opportunity to welcome you this morning. Be well and be safe.
Thank you to President Mearns. The First Amendment's commitment to a free exchange of ideas is at the heart of the educational mission of the College of Communication, Information, and Media. It is our honor to serve the Ball State University and greater area communities through the award-winning Ball State Public Media and student media, among them the Ball State Daily News, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary during the current academic year. Congratulations to them. As I stated, the commitment to the First Amendment reverberates throughout the university. I would like to thank and acknowledge our co-sponsor, the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and Dr. Marcia McGriff, Associate Vice President. I would also like to thank Dean Matthew Shaw and BSU University Libraries. In addition to this event, the university libraries will display a recent acquisition of a framed U.S. Constitution in Bracken Library Room 215 today from 1 to 5 p.m. Library resources related to the First Amendment and the U.S. Constitution will also be displayed in the lobby of the Bracken Library. I would also like to thank Dr. Johnny Sparks, Chair of the Department of Journalism, Ms. Lindsay Resdy Rhodes, Director of the Unified Media Lab, and Ms. Lisa Love of the Office of Inclusive Excellence for their vision and support in making this event happen. In the spirit of the First Amendment's protection of freedom of speech and press, we are holding a Constitution Day conversation focused upon student media. If you would like to participate, please enter your comments or questions in the chat box at live.edu/BSU or direct message them via Instagram to @BSUCCIM. As time allows, those comments will be shared with our moderator and our panel. And now it is my honor to introduce our moderator and panelists. First of all is Jean Polenski, who will serve as today's moderator. Jean is a Chief Operating Officer of the Freedom Forum Institute and of the Institute's First Amendment Center, a veteran multimedia journalist. He also writes, lectures, and is interviewed regularly on First Amendment issues. Mr. Polenski, a founding editor of U.S. Today, oversees all programs of the Freedom Forum Institute and is also a lifetime proponent of diversity in journalism as an essential characteristic of a free press. He has served as National Trustee for the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, a trustee of the United States Sports Academy, a trustee of the Newspaper Association of American Foundation, and a member of the Board of Trustees of the Association of Opinion Journalists Foundation. He also serves on CCAM's Advisory Council. We are honored that he is a graduate of Ball State University and he attended classes at the Nashville School of Law. Next is State Representative Ed Delaney. He is a retired lawyer. Shortly after Delaney married Ann McGovern, he began his service as a junior officer in the U.S. Navy. Delaney currently serves as a member of the Education Committee as well as the Ways and Means Committee. He is also the Assistant Democratic Caucus Chair. He was the founding lawyer for Investigative Reporters and Editors, Inc., which is now an international organization with thousands of members. He has served as an advocate for businesses and individuals in matters ranging from business disputes to estate litigation, election law, and First Amendment litigation. He has both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the State University of New York at Birmingham, and he graduated from Harvard Law School. Senator Representative Ed Clear is serving his fourth term in the Indiana House of Representatives. He represents most of Florida County, including the city of New Albany and Georgetown. Representative Clear serves on the House Ways and Means, Education and Public Policy Committees. In addition, he is a legislative appointee to the Board of Indiana's Choice Program, a state-funded program that helps seniors and people with disabilities stay in their homes. He is also a legislative appointee to the boards of the Indiana School for the Deaf, the Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites Corporation, and the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial Committee. Representative Clear earned a bachelor's degree in sociology at Indiana University Southeast. Our next panelist is Stan Sollers. Stan serves as a senior lecturer of telecommunications. He is a veteran broadcaster and an Emmy Award-winning sound engineer. He has produced and engineered more than 75 hours of programming for National Public Radio. In addition to his teaching, he hosts the local broadcast of NPR's Morning Edition. Over the course of his career, he has earned numerous awards, including 2 prestigious Edward Murrow Awards, 2 Emmys for Sound, 39 Best Newscast Awards, and 5 Faculty Member of the Year Awards. Our final panelist, but one that is really at the heart of what we're discussing today, is Taylor Smith. Chicago native Taylor Smith is a senior at Ball State University studying multimedia journalism and creative writing. She is the editor-in-chief of the national award-winning Ball State Daily News, which, as I said, is celebrating its 100th year anniversary. Taylor is a student in the Honors College carrying a 3.975 GPA, and I have to wonder how much further we might take that out in terms of the point is there, and has been named to the Dean's List all 6 semesters she's been at Ball State, so it's always an honor for me to shake her hand. She is herself a national award-winning writer, and her work has been recognized as among the best in the nation by the Associate Collegiate Press, the College Media Association, and the Society of Professional Journalists. She is currently completing 2 internships, including one with the St. Louis Magazine. So as you can see, we have an illustrious group to take up the conversation about freedom of the press and the First Amendment. Jean, I will turn it now to your capable hands, and I look forward to hearing our discussion.
Thank you very much, Dean. Good morning. It's good to be with you. Thank you all for being here and joining us virtually, if that's your manner. Our charge today has sort of a formal to explore certain things, but I think what I'd like to do is open with the idea that we're here today on celebrating Constitution Day, but really to talk about, in terms of a student press, why is it here? What does it do? Why is it worth protecting? Why is it worth consuming, if you're out there as a reader, listener, or user? So I think we'd like to just put it in those terms, and I'm hoping that when we get to your questions, you can ask variations on that theme as well from the folks here who work in terms of with students, our students, or who, in the case of our state representatives here, are defending the rights of student journalists. So let's start there, if I may. They've made it very easy for me since their first names are both Ed, so I won't mess that up. But let me also, on a personal note, thank you for being Republican and Democrat on the same stage, on the same issue, in a spirit of cooperation. That's something sadly lacking in our public life. And if you, yes, let's give them a round of applause. You know, I might say, just to open, the First Amendment gives us the right to have, as the courts would say, vigorous and robust discussions, which doesn't mean we have to be polite. But the whole point of the First Amendment is for us to all discuss and for our elected representatives to carry out the will, and with their own knowledge, for the best possible solution for the greatest number of people in what we hope is the shortest amount of time. Notice there's nothing in there about never-ending conflict. There's nothing in there about undue partisanship, although it's assumed in the system there will be partisanship. So I think that when we talk about the piece of legislation I'd like to bring up called New Voices, which is a national campaign reflected here in Indiana to protect the right of student journalists, or as I like to say, and I slip into the old habit, but journalists who are students, to do what they do. So if I may, and I don't know if either one of you in talking about this tends to go first, but talk for a moment about New Voices, why you have been co-sponsors, and what the importance is in the state of Indiana of having that kind of legislation on the books.
Let me start by thanking everyone, but you know, why am I interested in this? I'm interested in this because while I was practicing law, I had a case involving not a student journalist, but a teacher, high school journalism teacher, who got fired, and as I recall the facts, he simply wanted to report in the paper that one of the students had been arrested for a very serious criminal charge. I think it was murder or attempted murder, and so he prepared the newspaper with the help of the students to report this simple fact. It was not political controversy or anything else. And the school district thought that that would make them look bad. And so they didn't want it in there. That was to me a great lesson in the First Amendment. If we can't look bad when something terrible happens, if we can't report a simple, if ugly fact, what are we doing? So that got me back into student journalism and protecting the rights. And then Ed Clear showed up, who was from the other party, and he got committed to this campaign. And I don't get crazy about bipartisanship. I think it has more glamour than reality. But when I have an opportunity to work with someone from the other party on some issue that I believe in, I will. And that's been important. Now back as to what you're doing, what is really different in my mind, I asked Taylor here, you know, who looks at your publication and where? And the answer is apparently more online than in print. But because it's online, parents and alumni and other people can see it more than would have been true. So I think the number one thing about student journalism, because you're young, you're smart, and you're computer savvy, is to help the rest of us figure out how to disseminate news in today's world. And I think what people like me don't like about the broad social media is I need an editor. I just desperately need somebody to tell me, don't spend your time looking over here, look at this, this is important, or here's a better analysis of it. And I think you're going to have to learn how to digest and focus information in this wave of information that we have. And so you can do it because you're young, you got time, you got the technology. I think we killed the cost part of this. I mean, because it used to be relatively expensive to print it and circulate it. Well, you know, a lot of the cost is gone, so help us out.
Thank you, Gene. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thanks to Ball State for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for being here. And thanks also to Ball State and all of you for taking the time and thought to celebrate Constitution Day. Congratulations, Taylor, on the first 100 years of the Ball State Daily News, and here's looking forward to the second 100 years. But it is very good to be with all of you. It's always good to be with my colleague, Ed Delaney. I'll get it out of the way. 2 Eds are better than 1. Couldn't resist. But no, it's a pleasure to work with Representative Delaney. And, you know, I think it's notable that when Gene observed the fact that a Republican and a Democrat are actually able to work together, it drew applause. So that probably says something about where we are as a country. With respect to the New Voices legislation, we may get into some more specifics, but I appreciate everything Representative Delaney said, and I know, Gene, you want to get into talking about some broader issues as well. I think you know, what's important to note about the New Voices legislation is not just what it would do, but what it wouldn't do. And I think a lot of the resistance and even fear-mongering around the New Voices legislation has to do with misrepresentations of what it would do. In fact, it wouldn't require schools, either high schools or colleges, to do much of anything. At the high school level, it wouldn't require a school corporation or a public charter school to even have a student newspaper or other student media. It wouldn't dictate how the leadership of those media is selected. It wouldn't dictate how the newspaper is published online or in print, or the frequency, or anything else. All it really is about is accountability, and saying that if there is a student publication or other student media, and the school administration wishes to restrict something, to censor something, to exercise prior restraint, that the administration has to articulate why that is appropriate under the statute. And then it would provide a right of appeal for the student press. But it really leaves administration holding almost all the cards. It just says, if you're going to censor something, then tell us why. And it needs to fit into one of these categories. You know, it's libelous or slanderous, or it's going to disrupt the educational environment. You know, some list of reasons in the legislation that I think everybody can agree on. So I'll leave it there, and we can get into some more specifics if you'd like.
Taylor, if I might turn to you. In listening to you, Representative Clare, essentially, on a national basis, the legislation moves from a posture of you can do what you want in terms of the administration to the assumption that students have a right to speak or to write, to publish, and government, i.e. the administration, can only intrude under certain reasons. So it flips the sort of assumption when you start around, if I could sum that up. So that puts an awful lot of authority, if a state buys into that, in the hands of student journalists, in the sense that it recognizing that, like other journalists in the country, we all start with the premise that you're free to do what you want. And then there are certain restraints that might come into play by statute. That imposes also, I think, a degree of responsibility, which is often not talked about sometimes when we talk about rights. We don't pair it up with responsibilities. So you're really in the hot seat here. I mean, you've got to make a lot of hard decisions. Can you talk for just a moment, in your view, as a practitioner, the value of student media, not just the Daily News, although I know it's sort of all commingled these days, but also the responsibilities that you might tell your staff about when they go to work?
So one thing that I want to start with is the Daily News wouldn't have been around for 100 years if we weren't taking these rights and responsibilities seriously. We build a staff that is really dedicated to the rights and responsibilities that the First Amendment gives us. And I think that there is kind of this sense of, oh, when we give students the freedom to report on anything that they want, you know, they're going to report on the typical college stereotypical stories that people kind of, you know, they associate us with that type of college life. But at the core of every journalist is the rights and responsibilities to report the whole truth and to do it ethically and responsibly, to get that whole story out there. And with student media, we take that very seriously. We put out stories that we know not everyone is going to agree with, but one of the things that I think President Mearns touched on too is that we are going to get ideas and conversations that are not always going to be easy. But what we're here for is to give everyone the opportunity to have their voices heard. And as student journalists, I think that, especially with the generation that we're a part of now, there are people who don't understand why those voices deserve that platform. And it's our job to take those voices and say, here's what they have to say, and this is why they deserve to say it.
Stan, if I could turn to you. You have a dual role. You produce material that goes to students and others, but you also teach. What's the understanding in either your larger audience or in your student audience, if you will, for your teaching, about the rights and responsibilities of media that's aimed directly at students, but also the larger media that might go out, as the Daily News and others do, go out into the community as well?
Thank you, Gene, and good to be with you all here today. I see no difference. The truth is the truth, and we must report that truth. We've got, all of us, journalists who are students, and those of us who are getting paid, we must ask the question, says who? In fact, it's incumbent on every one of our viewers, listeners, readers, to also ask that question, says who? And we all vet our sources. And this is what we get through student media and through commercial and public media. We have those editors, which are missing in a lot of social media. Social media certainly can do a lot of good, and our instruments are on social media, Facebook and the like. But we have to go back to the fundamentals and stick with them and ascertain issues to deal with. So I don't see any difference.
The foundation I've been associated with since I left USA Today, now 25 plus years, is about to release a survey, and while we're not supposed to talk about it, I think I will. There's one number about freedom of the press that I found, well, two facts, I guess I should say. One number, two facts. One, they actually see the press we have today as the greatest threat to a free press, which I was sorely disappointed to see in large numbers. But also, if you're asking about general support for the press, it's at 14%. An astounding figure to me. I just would like to get from each of you, if I may, what is journalism doing that isn't being, meeting this desire by the public for information? And what could they do? What could you do, either to encourage it through legislation that might help a financially struggling industry, or through the work that you do that reaches them? What can you do to bring back this support for a free press? And I'm not talking about subscriptions, I'm not talking about, this is just the concept of the free press as a representative of the public and a watchdog on government.
May I jump in? There is too much opinion and not enough fact being broadcast or printed, but since I'm in broadcasting, and I have just indicted myself right there, I will comment about broadcasting. Fine to have opinions, but I must quote, and this was on Morning Edition, cheap plug right there for IPR, This was on Morning Edition this morning. The great journalist, way ahead of her time, Ida B. Wells, born in 1862, passed away in 1931. She says, "Your opinion does not impeach the facts." She is also, I wrote down this other quote speedily as I was on the air, "The people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press." And given that, I think too many broadcasters and too many, with newspapers, we have seen the hollowing out of the tree. A newspaper is sold, and the LA Times comes to mind. If I'm correct in memory right here, before the newspaper was sold a few years ago, and it's gone through various hands, it was making on a regular basis around $200 or $300 million of profit annually. So a consortium of sorts bought the paper, and of course, if you have shareholders, you want to show a profit. So what they did was they started eliminating bureaus. And this is not a statement against stocks and bonds or anything of that sort. It's a matter of priorities. And as there was less content, then people started to wander elsewhere to find that content. The same thing's happened to broadcasting. Commercial broadcasting has shot itself in the foot so badly, it's beyond description. They've eliminated news departments or the reading out of the newspaper, okay to do now and again with proper attribution. But certainly that's one of the things that I hope we will get to in a bit here about what we're doing at Ball State.
Let's talk about Ball State for a moment. How do you answer that question, in effect, for your audience, for your students and others, as parents and alumni and administration staff and the rest?
I think that growing up and being educated in a time where social media is just at my fingertips at all times, it's important to touch on how social media plays a role in that kind of loss of faith in the press. I scroll through my Facebook and family members or friends share articles from publications I've never even heard of, publications that probably should not be trusted, are probably not reporting the whole truth, but they align with their beliefs, or they align with the opinions that they're trying to share regarding what they're disagreeing with, but they're not diving into the publications and the outlets that are reporting what can be trusted. Social media is a brewing ground for rumors and gossip and just all of these conversations that we should be having, but in our political climate right now are just all over, bouncing off the walls. And they're finding these articles that are written by people with the same belief as them, who are not doing the true reporting, using those rights and responsibilities that the First Amendment gives us. They're so opinionated that they're slowly taking away the trust and the faith that people have in us. And as student journalists, we are the ones who, we understand social media the most. We, like I said, we grew up with it at our fingertips. It is still at our fingertips. And it's a blessing to have it when you do need to get that reporting out there. There are so many outlets and ways to get that information. But if you're not a journalist, if you're not educated, if you're not trained to sift through social media to find the right things and the right answers, all of that information coming at you is so overwhelming that you don't know what to believe. And I think that kind of puts a screen in front of, if I can't believe this, and if this is being said here, then how am I going to trust anyone? So as student journalists, we have to take advantage of the resources we have at our fingertips. Yes, social media is important, but we have to earn back that trust somehow, and the only way we can do that is just to remain true to the craft.
Before we hear from our state representatives, something you said, Representative Delaney, that jogged my memory of a colleague of mine named Ed Breen, who I worked with a long while ago in Marion, is still doing a radio show there. And one of his programs, he interviewed the mayor of a relatively sizable city in Indiana, which had lost its last local media. And the mayor said to Ed, and apparently was no particular fan of this, they were actually critical of him, but he said, how do I talk to my constituents? How do I reach the people who voted for me, or perhaps more importantly, the people who didn't yet vote for him, as he might have put it. And I preface that just to say you're in a different role than our first two panelists who spoke, because you're the subject of coverage, but there are some tools that you might have, New Voices legislation and others, to assist both the media aimed at students in larger roles. So with that, again, back to that question, what can we do to get back that trust or audience that people are not doing now in the business?
Well, this is a very difficult subject because I come from the background that says the press doesn't want any government money or assistance. So the suggestion that because the press, meaning mostly the traditional press, is weak, that we need to help them is somewhat difficult. I will point to an example, though. I subscribe to a lot of ones, a lot of papers, but one of which is the Salt Lake Tribune. They have found a mechanism to turn themselves into a two-headed newspaper. One part is a not-for-profit, and one part is a for-profit. So they're finding a mechanism to use the tax law. Very creative. I don't know if it's going to work. A guy you may know named Jay Sheladay is part of that movement. So that's an approach, is for people to figure this out. For us to give, for us, meaning the government, to give money directly to news organizations is very dangerous. Although what's curious, Ed will know this, we have an ongoing fight at the legislature about requiring publication in print of tax sales and for seizures of property and so forth. And it keeps slipping, the requirement keeps getting smaller. That was an indirect way of funding the press. And I think those are the ways we need to look at. Funding the universities is an approach. I appreciate what you're doing here. I think it's a huge help. But we've got to, part of the, by the way, I'll just get this off my chest. We got to treat our people a little better. So what do I mean by that? Two of the newspapers that I read when I was young, one was Pravda, because I was a Russian linguist. I read it for what was not in there. Let me repeat that. When something big was happening in the world and it wasn't in that newspaper, that told me a great deal. So you had to do that. I represented the Indianapolis Star, which was a hard right, totally Republican organization. I was their lawyer, okay? But they told me who got shot. They told me when the city council met. They told me what was decided at the city council. They told me, a lot of very useful information, and I was able to respect that. So we need to tell the public that we're counting on you too, okay? You've got to tell fact from opinion, and you've got to be happy with fact, and you've got to be open on opinion. I mean, so I think we need to teach people how to read in the sense of how to use the media. I'll end on this note somewhat related to this. I was hearing this morning again this unending debate about what Facebook's responsibility is. Well, Facebook is not a newspaper, and it is not a public institution. All they want to do is get eyes on their content to sell ads. We can't count on them to solve this problem. The legitimate news organizations and the public have got to solve the problem as to what is trash and what isn't trash. I'm not so concerned about the opinion issue. I think most of us can discern the difference between fact and opinion. I'm very concerned about the belief issue. That's the new issue. It's belief trumps fact. It's not opinion that trumps fact. I believe that COVID's not a problem. End of conversation. That's not an opinion based upon a study or analysis. That's a belief. This is the big change, and I think you guys have got to help us figure out how to deal with these, quote, beliefs.
Thank you, Gene. Boy, my mind is racing. So much to talk about. I don't know about the, I don't know if I would agree, Representative Delaney, with what you just said about people being able to distinguish between fact and opinion. I think Stan made an excellent point earlier. I would underscore that and say that many of the wounds are self-inflicted, particularly as the lines have blurred between fact and opinion. And Taylor, you didn't use this term, but I think what you were referring to is what has been called, the echo chamber, where people are, to your point, with Facebook, not only are they tuning in to the cable infotainment channel of their choosing, but they're getting fed in their Facebook feed and other social media feeds information that has been selected for them to reinforce what they already believe. So I think this blurring of the line between fact and opinion is one of the most dire issues. I think just the diminishment of traditional media. You touched on the revenue models, with the Salt Lake paper. I mean, we're seeing this really interesting and I would say frightening dichotomy where you have the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post. They're doing great, because they've figured out how to capitalize on their scale and bring in revenue streams. I get probably every day an email from the New York Times inviting me to subscribe to their wonderful New York Times cooking site. And for $1.50 a week or something, I can have access to, tens of thousands of wonderful recipes and all sorts of great content. And it's another revenue stream that if I were to do that would bring them another, $60 or $80 or $100 a year. But the small newspapers can't do that, and they don't have that leverage, they don't have that scale. I think I always, when Paige was introducing me, it reminded me, as always happens in these settings, that my bio is woefully out of date. Ed and I have actually been in the legislature, this is our 7th term, and one of the lamentable things that has happened in the time that we have been in office, obviously there have been changes at the Star. I'm in New Albany, all the way down on the river, and when I first started, the Louisville Courier-Journal, which is my metro paper, had a State House bureau with a wonderful reporter, and they eliminated that several years after I was elected. There is no State House bureau for the Louisville Courier-Journal. I actually used to be a journalist, and one of the papers I worked for was the New Albany paper, which was the New Albany Tribune. Some years later, the New Albany Tribune combined with the Jeffersonville Evening News to become the News and Tribune. Some years after that, they eliminated the printing press, and most of the physical presence in Floyd County, which is where New Albany is located. The paper is now the News and Tribune, headquartered in Jeffersonville in Clark County, with a nominal presence in Floyd County. The Courier-Journal no longer has a Southern Indiana bureau and has all but given up on Southern Indiana coverage. They used to have a very robust Southern Indiana bureau when I was growing up. So all of these things have changed. I think we've lost, talking with Steve Key with the Hoosier State Press Association, with whom Ed and I have worked closely on this legislation. I don't quote me on this, but I think during the pandemic we've lost at least a dozen papers in Indiana. So these are scary things, and I'll close by saying, back to the first 100 years of the Ball State Daily News. I think, Taylor, that maybe, and I think we're going to get into this, Gene, maybe the next 10 years will be the most important in the life of the Ball State Daily News, because I think you are going to be called upon to play a broader role as we see other media receding and not there to cover the very important stories in the community that need to be covered.
Yes, if I could
Go ahead, please do.
Yes, okay. With the loss of the news coverage in Southern Indiana, as you've pointed out, and this ties right in with the daily news, I have heard people through the years ask, why do you still print? Aren't your students looking at these things online? Well, the DN, the stacks of the papers that do get used, are in effect billboards, still letting us know the DN exists, and you can read about the conversations. The sad bit about what's happening in Southern Indiana could happen here or anywhere with the DN or any other publication or broadcast. We're missing out on the conversation, aren't we? If we don't have those local papers and broadcasters. And we've got to have these conversations, because if we don't, then we're going to go over to this corner and that corner, and there are going to be, especially as we've seen, some of the social media playing upon fear, and fear floats on a sea of anger. And oh yes, I need to get my dose today. And whereas what we do, we're trying to give you this side, that side, and the other side, and you decide.
Well, Taylor, you're back on the hot seat here now, representing all of student media in the entire planet, if you don't mind. We talked about the first 100 years. Despite appearances, I wasn't here for the first anniversary, but I was here for the 50th anniversary, so now we're at 100. When you look at the news environment today with so many other sources, whether it's opinion or fact or data, I mean, you can pick up the little magic lantern and have access to anything, pretty much. Why would the daily news fit into that echo structure? What is the value, just to be blunt, of what you and your colleagues do and will do in the future, as Representative Clare, I think, accurately poses the question?
Again, I just think that we have this responsibility to give students a voice. And social media, like I said, is such a mess of all these different kinds of things. You know, you could say whatever you want, it doesn't mean you're going to be heard on there. What we do at the Daily News is we give people the opportunity to tell their story. We are there for them to get their voices out there. And even going back to kind of our point with the paper standing as a billboard, you know, not a lot of people, especially, you know, I'm a student, I know how they act. Not many of them go around and read up on the news going around in Muncie. But when they see that paper there and the cover that we work, you know, hours to piece together every week, you know, they think to themselves, maybe I should pick that up. Because they don't always feel the need to go to our website. They don't always feel the need to check our social media resources. So it is valuable that we have the opportunity to reach audiences on all of these platforms.
Let me just press you on politely on something you said, but Stan, you may also, given that you work with students, you talked about voice. Mm-hmm. Some people will hear that and think that's opinion. Will think that that's just that unfiltered, unresponsible voice. You know, we have a First Amendment so we can grunt, kind of a theory. How do you respond to that voice question? It's not just opinion, right? It's also a unique something?
Yes, exactly. There are so many stories out there that people have to tell that go under the radar. We reach out to underrepresented communities in the area. We cover people whose voices in the past, whose stories, I guess you could say, didn't necessarily get the airtime that other stories would have gotten. And there are people, like I said, who still don't understand why it is that we turn to these underrepresented communities, why it is that we care to tell their stories when there are other things that they consider of more importance and more prominence. But as student journalists, we feel the need to get every story told. You know, there are people who depend on us to not only get their stories out there, but to bring them support as well. You know, there are small businesses in the area that were struggling immensely because of COVID, and because of the DN, we had the opportunity to profile those businesses, to give them that platform, and to, you know, not only get their voice, their story heard, but to help them in that way. We have artists and alumni who are taking strides of sharing and showcasing the art of the Black community, and how people, you know, they see this art and they don't understand it, or they interpret it in the wrong way. But us at the Daily News, we take their voice, the voice that they want people to hear, say this is what it means. And without the Daily News, they would not have been able to share that story and to get that understanding, you know, across the audience. So it's incredibly valuable to me to be able to have, you know, the Daily News at my fingertips and get these stories told in the way that the people who the story belongs to want it heard.
Thank you. Stan, what about her answer? How do you evaluate that, looking at the students you've seen come through your classes? Is that motivation, that mission that the editor has just described, something that you have to imbue in students? Do they bring it to you, and what do they take from that?
Yes, all of the above. And you know, what you just heard Taylor say is what will make IPR WBST and Ball State PBS WIPB better stations. Not just with boots on the ground. We have more personnel going out to cover the news as we combine our operations, but to learn from the good things that these stations and their staffs have done in the past. And then we, older people, will then feel that enthusiasm and get that guidance, because each generation guides the other to an extent. And there's a wonderful exchange there. So, absolutely. And I must say, Taylor, for a centenarian, you don't look a day over 20.
Gene, may I jump in and make
please.
a comment? I think, you know, there's an opportunity. What I was getting at when I said the next 10 years may be the most important is certainly, as Representative Delaney and I have worked on the New Voices legislation, we have recognized and talked about the unique position and perspective of student journalists. The student journalists can tell stories that otherwise won't be told. But looking forward, I think, again, there is a broader role to play, and you know, places like Ball State have an opportunity to create ways for their student journalists to engage with the broader community, to be a larger part of the civic conversation. You know, what's not getting reported on as we lose a dozen or more newspapers across Indiana, and others are struggling to survive, what's not getting reported on is town board meetings and school board meetings and things like that. So there's a loss of accountability, there's a loss of connection to the community, and I think the Ball State Daily Student and others have a role to play there. You know, Ball State has, I have to say, been tremendously supportive of the New Voices legislation. When we were working on this, as we've worked on this, Ball State has been one of the leading voices in support of this. Becca Rice, who heads up governmental affairs for Ball State and isn't able to be here today because she's traveling, you know, was always there, has always been there to testify in support, and just, you know, Ball State has been an unabashed supporter. But I'll throw out one other model, and that is, you know, Franklin College has filled some of the vacuum at the State House as we've seen newspapers close their State House bureau. Franklin College has the statehousefile.com, and they're picking up the slack and writing a lot of stories that otherwise wouldn't be written. And I think there are similar opportunities here and in other college and university communities throughout the state.
Stan, I did want to be remiss not to, as an alum and on the Dean's advisory group, to not ask you a question about having public media being part of CCIM, being even more ingrained in that aspect of the work of Ball State, and also to encourage you to send in questions if you haven't, either here in person or virtually. We've agreed, I know some of you have to go to class, we have a certain amount of time for the live podcast today, but we've agreed to answer some questions beyond that time frame. So if you still have a question, or if you have one, we'll try to respond to that as well. But talk for a moment about, for public media here on this campus, being part of CCIM.
Well, it's a dynamo. And for those of you leaving, it's a dynamo. There you go. It's great synergy.
About to go to class time here.
Thank you for your support. There we go. No, I'm teasing. Go to class. Yeah.
Or you could do what I do, and well, never mind.
Yeah. No, it's a dynamo because, again, each generation learns from the other. We've got that. We will have more people available. But you know what we teach in journalism and in TCOM, in our college, is that if a program has meaning, or if information has meaning to people, and you promote it and you position it, it will be heard, seen, and read. And so that's why ascertainment is so very important in the traditional sense that broadcasters did have to do it, and many still do because of FCC rules and the like. But aside from that, we ought to be ascertaining what's going on in the community. And so I see nothing but good things ahead. And it's not just the volume of human beings that will be added to the equation here. It's the ideas. Because, again, the generations learn from each other.
Just for a bit of perspective, after graduating, I went to work in Marion and was then sent off to cover the legislature a few years later. We had about 16 reporters in one of these little wooden shack things that were at that time right outside the House and Senate. And by the way, if you get a chance to read some of the work of these two Louisville Courier journalists, Patrick Siddons and Gordon Englehart, there was actually two people in those days. Pat was based in Bloomington and Gordon was in Indianapolis. But if you ever get the chance to read the work that either of them have done through the years, extraordinary journalists, and they were part of that roughly 16-person unit that was covering the legislature when it was in session. Today, I gather, no. In the time that we have remaining, do we have a question? Tony Sparks is approaching the podium.
The results are in.
I want to first say thank you, Gene, and to our panelists for this dialogue today, so important on Constitution Day. The first question I'm going to selfishly ask myself. It's my question
You're at the podium.
As the chair of the Department of Journalism and someone who has served as a director of student media here and also at Austin Peay State University, my alma mater, having the opportunity to ask two advocates as state representatives, our eds, as two eds are better than one, this is a very important question to me. We talked about the question of whether government should be involved in funding of journalism, to support journalism. I believe the question is very relevant for student journalism in particular. For roughly the first 90-something years of the Daily News history, the Daily News was able to sustain and thrive on its own advertising revenue because it offered an opportunity to advertisers, an exclusive opportunity to advertisers to reach the university community audience. The university has always subsidized the work of student journalists at the Daily News. However, we've seen advertising revenue plummet over the last 8 to 10 years. And the future of advertising revenue at the DN, if it follows national trends and all expectations, will not be able to continue to sustain its operation. How far, how much should the university at a state institution be willing to subsidize journalism, education, and the First Amendment through the student press?
As one legislator, I have no objection at all to the university's funding it. It is a teaching function as well as a news function. So there's a full existing justification, if it was necessary, that all expenses be borne from the budget of the university. I don't think that's a problem. Some schools throw the cost into the student fund that might give you a chance to go to the gym in the evening or whatever other activities are. That's also okay. I don't think that's a problem. I think you need to work on drawing these internet-type advertisers to your function. I'm sure you are. I'm sure that's an opportunity for you. So I don't think that's a problem. It's a problem in the broader society. It's a problem in the small-town newspaper that just they don't have enough mass to attract these internet advertisers. So they've got a terrible problem. And so anyway, that's my view. Go right ahead and fund it. But I think it's worthwhile, very worthwhile for the student newspaper to try to get outside revenue, because that is what the model is. When you graduate, you're going to work at some place that doesn't get money from the state. So you better start thinking. And that's something you'll remember, Gene will remember this, in the quote, old days, reporters didn't know anything about the business side of the newspaper. They made it their business to not know where the money came from. they only wanted to go get the story. Well, that game, unfortunately, is behind us.
The time is gone and not coming back, I don't think.
Just briefly, I agree. I think it is perfectly appropriate function, a very appropriate function of the university to support a journalism program the way that the university supports any other program that provides an opportunity for students to learn and to have hands-on experiences. I think in the case of the student newspaper, it's unfortunate but not unexpected that there's this ongoing decline of advertising revenue. And it's important to think about ways to keep the student newspaper as independent as possible, especially in terms of editorial decision making. But absolutely appropriate for the university to fully support student media, and for to the extent that the General Assembly provides funding for the university, for that funding to make its way to supporting student journalism. Education and practice.
Taylor, difficult moment for a journalist. You are at a publication that gets money from taxpayers, from students, from your audience in a way that's very different than a subscription. How do you, and again, you're just the one on the hot seat, how do you juggle that idea that somebody comes in and says, look, I give you money, you need to do this, or you can't or shouldn't do that? And again, it could be not these two gentlemen, but others in the legislature or in the administration. Fortunately, I don't think those collisions have happened often at Ball State, but they have at other campuses where literally you get student fees. Sometimes student government comes in and says, you will. How do you juggle all of that, which is something a lot of editors out there don't have to juggle?
I am very thankful for the experience I have had so far with the Daily News, because we are, all of us, not just myself, all of us on the staff of the Daily News have educators and supporters behind us that have full faith in the staff of the DN. We have immense freedom in that newsroom. And I have never, I've only been the editor-in-chief for a few months now, but I have never been limited in what I can decide to put in the paper. And I don't think any of us would say that we have felt that way. But I do know that, there are papers out there where they don't have the opportunity to publish and print what they feel is necessary for their audience and the students. And what you have to do when you have a responsibility to your audience to put out what you believe is right. And I think it goes back to people not understanding, why these voices need to be heard, why these stories need to be told. But as students, I think that it is very valuable to understand that we are being educated by people who would not lead us astray. We have the responsibility to make those decisions, and we do our best to make the right one every time.
Gene, we have to thank Louis Englehart for establishing decades ago the standards that the students have, and long before Louis, for that matter, but he was the one who drilled it home. And if there was noise coming from the ad building, you would see him walking across the quad and going in there and straightening a few people out as to student press rights. So we have to remember Lou Englehart for that.
Thank you for that. Dean Turner, if I may, a lightning round, so to speak, for our panel, because this group, leave me out for the moment, does things, makes decisions. It participates in government and in fact develops and produces the news that then the two of you in some ways are responsible for reporting, but we've left out the third part of the equation in that life of news, and that is those of you, either here in this room or watching virtually, who consume. So in the lightning round, because we're over time, what would you tell that third component from your perspective about the role, the rights, and responsibilities of a free press? If you can do that succinctly, what would you tell them if they lined up and you say, I want you to know this about a free press, why it's important, why it's valuable, whatever it is. And why don't we start with our students?
I would tell them, I do this, because I love to do it. But the ultimate reason I do it is for them. I do it for the audience. I do it for my readers. I do it for the people who look to us to give you the news and the information that you are not only looking for, but that you deserve. And what I would say is a free student press is a press that is working for you. We are doing everything that we can to deliver you what we consider is the best that we can do. We work hours and hours each week to give you guys what we think you deserve, and we work hard for you. So trust us, have faith in us, and know that we are students. We are learning, but we can't learn if we don't have this outlet to learn in. So.
Stay in the vein of a broadcaster's existence, the soundbite response.
As difficult as it may be for me to restrain myself here, there is no difference, again, between student media and commercial or public media. I would say to you in the audience, and I am part of the audience as well, be a good reporter. Get more than one source, ask says who, and balance out your thoughts. If you're tempted to go in one extreme direction, try to modify that a bit and understand that there are other people with other opinions. You have the right to yours, but let's try to separate opinion from fact and know that we don't have time in the newsroom to go make up stuff. It's hard enough to get the facts right. So no, we're not writing fiction when we're in the newsroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Well, I would again echo the importance of making the distinction between fact and opinion, and really challenge consumers to think about which they're hearing, which they're reading, fact or opinion. But I would also challenge consumers of media to think about what it would be like if we didn't have the media to provide accountability. One of the ironies, not to be indelicate, but many of the people who are most skeptical of government right now, people who are most critical of government, are also very hostile toward the free press. And it's the free press that is there to hold government accountable. So I would challenge those folks to think about what would happen in terms of government accountability were there not a robust press.
Representative Delaney.
I'll wind up by taking you back briefly to the bill, the idea of protecting student journalism. Who were our opponents? This is very revealing. It was the school superintendents. And why was that? It's really pretty simple. We grade them on everything, their budget, how many teachers they have, how many kids go. We grade them to death. The legislature does. And they're just saying, I don't want anybody more causing me any trouble. I don't want any bad news. I already got enough bad news, so I can shut it off. And there's the point. They've been able to shut it off to some extent. Individuals have got to be open to bad news. That's what the readers owe us. They need to say, okay, this didn't make Joe Biden look very well, but I need to look at it. I'm a Joe Biden fan. I got to be broad-shouldered. I got to be able to take it and to assess things. So I think we need to expect our readers to use more judgment and to read things that they don't like and keep moving on. But that's a lot to expect, and we can't get there by screaming at each other. Thank you.
If you don't mind me jumping in, I remember an answer to that question by a former editor of the Associated Press, Kathleen Carroll, very succinct. She looked into the camera and said, "Give a damn." And I think that may be a nice way to wrap this up on Constitution Day. Wherever your perspective is, give a damn. With that, back to the Dean.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you all so very much for that. I have to tell you, as the Dean of the College of Communication, Information, Media, and as a member of Ball State University, the things that you have said have affirmed our strategic plan, our commitment to community and to sharing information that allows them to make informed decisions so that we're a member of our broader community. Also, our educational mission, so that we can support student journalists who will become journalists and will go out and represent that community. It is not a separate mission. Neither of those have to exist separately. They are part of who we are as an educational institution, as a member of our community, and as a member of the state of Indiana. So you have inspired me to continue going forward and supporting the work that we're doing as we bring Ball State Public Media, our educational goals, and our student media into the college, and think about how we can leverage all of that, all of those resources to make sure that we're representing the entire realm of information, voice, and the needs for information throughout our community. I am so inspired by this. Thank you all so very much for contributing to this discussion and for sharing your thoughts with us. I would also like to encourage those of you who are here or at home to take a moment to review the U.S. First Amendment. Read this and consider how you can put into practice one or two of the ideas that you've heard today. If you're a member of the Ball State University community, please take the time to review our university's Bill of Rights and Responsibilities and to sign up for Intergroup Dialogue's Community of Practice that will help us learn how to have civil, thoughtful, engaged discussions about our differences of opinion. And just finally, thank you again so much to our panelists and all the professional journalists whose work you do and your integrity gives voice to who we are, and even more important, who we want to be in the future. Thank you all so much that have joined us, both in person and virtually. Thank you.